Well, we're all here. So nice to see you guys in person. I'm Emily Feinberg. I am the editor of Go with the Flow, and Lily William and Karen Schneemann can introduce themselves, but they are the creators of the book that we will be talking about. And I'm very excited to see them because we all live in different states. So this is very fun. And the only time we get to hang out is when they randomly come to New York. And we go out in Brooklyn, which is always fun.
Yeah, so I'm Lily. I'm the co-author and illustrator of Go with the Flow, and I live in Denver, Colorado.
And I'm Karen Schneemann. I am a co-author with Lily of Go with the Flow, and I live in San Francisco, California.
So Go with the Flow is a graphic novel that came out earlier this year, and a sort of brief, the way I usually pitch it in case any of you listening are not familiar with it, it's a middle grade graphic novel about four best friends fighting for menstrual equality. It starts when one of the girls notices that the boys have new football uniforms again this year, and the school can't even bother to stock the tampon and pad dispensers in the bathrooms that the students have to pay for anyway. All of this is terrible. So they stage what we've been calling a menstrual revolution and learn a few things about themselves along the way. So to get started, I know we're sort of talking about script writing, but we have this presentation that covers sort of the making of the book, and I think we want to keep it pretty casual in the same way that Mark and Jean did. So if we go to the next slide. Also, we can't control the slide, so I might forget to say that. One of you has to jump in if I forget to say that. So Lily, I wanted to start sort of talking about your history here. I work with Lily on picture books. I remembered at the last minute to bring it. And the thing that I've always loved about Lily's writing is the sort of edge of activism in it, and that you don't shy away from activism. What sort of drew you to this particular topic? And Karen, of course, if you want to jump in too.
So I put together this presentation, and I just put this slide in there because I didn't know if some people who might be watching might not know what menstruation is. So just to cover our bases, I just wanted to say that menstruation, or having a period, is when the inside of the lining of your uterus, called the endometrium layer, sloughs off and you bleed. Normally this happens once a month for 4 to 7 days from puberty through menopause. So that's what menstruation is. And then next slide. In our book, we talk a lot about menstrual equity. Equity is the act of being fair or equal. And menstrual equity is basically that, but with periods. So making sure that the world is prepared and fair and inclusive of everyone who bleeds. So our book kind of talks about that. And Karen and I together decided we wanted to write about that, but we approached it initially in a different way. I have incredibly bad periods. I have endometriosis and fibroids. So struggling with that made me want to talk about it, because every person who has a period knows there's some point in your friendship where you just talk about your periods. For Emily and I, it was early in our working relationship.
I'm very open about my period. I'll tell you.
So, I guess it's not professional, but we talked about it early on. And then Karen and I did the same thing with our friendship. So we wanted to be able to talk about that, in a different sort of way. Next slide, I think. And then maybe.
It's like a surprise. I don't know what's coming next.
Yeah, I forgot. So in the book, our girls start a menstrual revolution. And then next slide. I think this says Karen and I. Okay, wait. Next slide. And then I'll let Karen talk about. There you go. Karen, take it away.
So Lily and I met at California College of the Arts, and I know, Emily, you were asking about Lily's activism, and I've always considered myself to have very strong feelings and very and I have like an activist, I guess, perspective on things, but I don't act on it. And I think meeting Lily is what kind of prompted me to be like, oh yeah, we could do something about it. You know, she just definitely has that like optimistic, like we're going to change the world. Like, you know, with her sharks book, I was just amazed that that even happened. It was incredible. And then when we started talking about periods, we were saying, you know, because one of my best friends growing up had fibroids, and it took forever for her to get a diagnosis, and she struggled with it a lot, and she was going to different doctors, and then she struggled with fertility later on. And so it's just like this thing that no one talks about, and that I didn't realize was an issue, except that someone that I loved was going through it. And then when I met Lily and she had the same or very similar struggles, you know, I'm thinking, why don't we talk about this? Why don't people understand that this is a possibility? Or, you know, get the word out that people can know that this exists. You're not abnormal. I mean, that what's happening to you isn't normal and you can fix it, but you should know that there's a range of what's out there and what's normal and what can be addressed, you know? I don't know if I touched on our friendship enough on that answer.
Well, yeah, basically we would go to Curry every class after class every time. And like down the street from our college where we met, and we would just talk about periods. And then one day we were like, why don't we make a comic about periods? That seems like the best way to sort of share these anecdotal experiences that we all talk about behind closed doors, but just share them outwardly. Like, what would happen if we did that? Maybe it would start a conversation. Maybe it would make people feel less alone. So we like thought about that for a while, and then eventually did do that. I think that might be the next slide, but I'm not sure at this point.
Yes.
Yeah, so we made the Mean Magenta.
And when you guys made the Mean Magenta, what was your sort of ultimate goal with it? Was it to turn it into a comic or a graphic novel, or were you just trying to like find an outlet for this stigmatized thing that we all really want to talk about, but are sort of told not to?
I think we definitely had conversations where we're like, what if this got really popular, and what if people really, you know, started sharing, and how weren't sure when we started it what we wanted it to initially be. And I think we talked about having people write in too with their stories, and then we could like illustrate them and post them, or but I think mainly the impetus was just to get a conversation out there and to be like, you know, periods, let's talk about them. Let's see what happened from there.
Cool. So next slide, please. Okay, so if you want to talk a little bit, so Go With the Flow, as I said before, is a middle grade graphic novel. So I'll just say from my sort of own experience with your Mean Magenta comics, I loved them. Lily had just sent it to me early on as like we had already been working on picture books together, so we knew each other, and she said, I think you might like this. We talk about periods all the time. And I fell in love with it. And do you want to start? I'm not sure if this is the appropriate order of these slides, but you know, in the Mean Magenta, the women are in their 20s, sort of living their adult lives. And we had a lot of conversations at the beginning about aging them down and how do we get them to that middle grade kind of YA space. Do you guys want to talk about that a little?
Sure, yeah. I think we did all this. When we started the comic, we did like all this. If you go back a slide, there's just a kind of like a screenshot of we made all these rules for ourselves about like what we could and couldn't post. And then we knew them more extensively than what I looked up our files, and like not that much was actually written down, but like we knew them more than what was written down. And if you go to the next slide, we had these extensive documents, which were so long that like if I screenshotted them and put them in our presentation, you couldn't even like follow it. They were, you know, pages and pages about each girl being interviewed, answering questions. So we knew our characters really well. And then when we aged them down, it was like kind of just figuring out how they got to where they were. And I will say some of their trajectories have changed a little bit, just getting to know them more when we aged them down. But like the original comic, Abby's answering these are just screenshots from our documents. It's like Abby's answering questions about herself, and then we that's a drawing of the original young Abby, which we did. It changed, but we like kind of did the same process with them younger and tried to figure out like how they got to where they were. And Karen, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, so Lily and I, when we went to California College of the Arts, we studied animation together. And so we took some character classes, some story classes, and they always talked about like you really have to develop your characters, you have to develop the story before you can really make it feel real. And I think this really made that hit home for me, because this is the first big project where I spent so much time with Lily going over like, who are these people? How are they different from each other? Because we didn't want them to overlap and kind of morph personalities together just to make it confusing. So we had them down really, really well. And when we got the project to make this a graphic novel and to age them down, we made sure that we knew who those girls were, to the point where when we started writing the story, we were like, oh, no, Abby wouldn't say that. No, Christine would definitely say that, And so it feels like they're real people to us, like definitely to me and Lily. We've had conversations about that.
My favorite thing that we did when the book was about to launch was make one of those sort of like 1990s magazine quizzes. Which character are you? And I think I guessed which character I was, but I was completely wrong.
Who did you guess?
Who I was.
Who did you get?
I thought I wanted to be Christine because I think she's so funny. But I definitely I got Abby, which makes a lot of sense because also like I led a walkout in 6th grade. Can't even remember what for. Just no one followed, like one person followed. But it wasn't as well organized as Abby would have made it.
I always joke that everyone who gets Abby wants to be Christine.
Next slide, please.
Oh, so those are the original drawings of when we aged our girls down from how we had them in our comic. And then it changed because it never stays the same. And I also, after showing them to Karen, I was like, wait, actually, I don't like this color scheme. Next slide. The script. I really like PowerPoint presentations. I'm such an
no, this is amazing. So I'll start by saying, if we're talking about the script, which I know some people are tuning in specifically to hear us talk about sort of writing a graphic novel script. I will preface this by saying, when we worked on this book together, I kept telling Lily would say, I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't done a graphic novel before. And I would say, me neither. So, I'm going to screw up too, and it's going to be okay. But when I took this book to acquisitions, I didn't really have anything. I don't think I had some of those early character sketches and a general idea, which is a very, in the publishing world, acquisitions meeting is when you try to convince the sort of higher ups and the people who have all the money to give you some of that money to make a book. And you usually try to go as prepared as possible. Because, with a script, with a manuscript, with finished pages, but I wanted to get this under contract. And I went in with just kind of an idea. We hadn't even really outlined the full book yet, I don't think. And I remember that acquisitions meeting. It was really funny because the women in the room were so excited about it, and the men were all just kind of silent, like they didn't understand. But it was fine. And a lot of them have read the book and do like it. I think it's just so foreign to people who don't experience periods. But yeah, when we started working on this script together, one thing that I always try to talk to authors about, and Lily and I have had a million conversations about this, about thinking of it sort of as a 3-act structure just at the beginning. So you sort of know what beats to hit and when to hit them. So a scene doesn't go on too long, or a scene isn't too clipped and abrupt, turning to the next scene. So we did that sort of at the beginning, and then we sort of fleshed it out from there. Am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, I think our outline was really tight by the time we got to the script, because we'd gone over so many different, like we addressed so many of our notes in the outline, I think that when we ended up putting in the dialogue, it ended up just mostly being line edits pretty much in the dialogue. There were a few scene changes, but it wasn't monumental.
I think the scene changes sort of when we got towards the end were more about tightening what was actually happening in the scenes. And I think all of that was that's just how you edit a book. That's just how you create a book. You will have times where you have to go back and change a scene, or, you know, in theory, the scene works one way, but in reality, it's too light or too slight or too hard. And we did a lot of adjustments throughout that. But and then at one point, I remember you sending me sort of a full script, but we did a lot of the line edits once you had already drawn and colored the art, sort of in the last phases, I think.
That was one thing that was really interesting to me. I've never written a script before. And so Lily and I had gone back and forth, and we would each write different scenes, and then we'd each edit each other's scenes, and then we'd get back together and re-edit, and then we'd send them to you, and we'd be like, yes, it's perfect. And then we'd wait, and Emily would come back, and she'd be like, okay, note here, note here, note here. And we're like, oh, she's right. Like, that's missing. And then we had the script pretty well done. I remember Lily was going to start drawing because she wanted like a whole script before she really did all the thumbnails. And I think, what was it originally supposed to be, like 160 pages or something? And it ended up like 336.
Yeah, it's like about a 350-page book. When we got the final copies, I was like, oh my gosh. They couldn't even lift the box. Like, a whole bunch of them in there.
I specifically said to Emily, I was like, my next book cannot be this long or I will be so sad.
We are working on a next book right now, and that is both of our goals, is to kind of we're going to try to keep it closer to 200 pages for that audience.
Emily, I have a question for you. So I get a lot of questions, you know, where it's like, what do I have to have in my pitch packet for my graphic novel? And I have since pitched a graphic novel properly with a pitch packet and like some example finals and an outline and things like that. But, you know, our book was bought with nothing basically. And it was bought with art for something that wasn't the same thing, and an idea. And we weren't even really in the room. We just were like, yeah, you can do that. Like we would love to be part of this. And how, like for me, I didn't know how abnormal that was until like I think we were most of the way through the book. How did you know that we could do that? Because we didn't know. I mean, I did picture books previously, and I wanted to write novels, so I've written some, but I'd never made a graphic novel. I'd never written a script. Karen and I went to animation school. Karen's an engineer by day. Like this was not something we had really discussed, but you somehow had full faith we could do this. How?
Well, I think a big part of it was that I knew you, Lily, and we had worked, I think at that point we had 2 of our books from our 5-book picture book series out. Or maybe the second one was about to come out, if Polar Bears Disappeared. And I knew how diligently you worked, and also a little bit, I was a little more insightful as to how your brain works, and sort of what you need to keep on track, which is a big part of being an editor, is just kind of trying to figure out what each author needs, what each illustrator needs. Everybody is very different.
Now I'm so curious. I'm like, oh gosh.
No, for you, it's just like, I have to be ultra organized to which really helps me because I'm not the most organized person naturally, but when I am, I'm like, oh, this is so much easier. Why don't I live my life like this? But I still have not learned. And so I didn't doubt for a second that you would take this seriously and that we would be able to do it. And I think the other big piece is that I didn't know what I was doing. So, and I know myself, and I like to problem solve and I like to figure things out. And it just seemed really exciting to me to at least try to do this thing that I didn't know if we could do. But I did have faith that an actual book would be produced at the end. I didn't know what that would be. I think there were times where we were talking about sort of leaning into the more nonfiction space of it. But as we started to really get to know the girls, it became clear that we needed to use the friendship story as the vehicle to drive the plot, and sort of incorporate as naturally as we could some of those nonfiction things that we wanted to talk about. So you sort of see those throughout the book in Abby, the main character's blogs. So as she starts getting sort of fired up about menstrual equity, she starts researching herself and starts a blog, which eventually becomes a pivotal part in the plot towards the end. But we sort of used that as a way to sort of, I guess, showcase certain facts and histories that we wanted to talk about in terms of menstrual equality. And once we figured that out, I felt pretty good about it, but I was very nervous the whole time. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
I felt similarly.
But I think that's like, sometimes that's the way that it works best, is when you're just kind of flying blind and your sort of, I don't know, goals are all the same. You know, you'll get there eventually. And I think, I mean, I know for me, working on this book gave me so much confidence as an editor. And I hope for you too as creators, it sort of helped you see that you can do a lot of things that you weren't sure you could do before.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. I don't know what it is. This is so fun. Oh, I can't even see that. I'm gonna get real close to computer, guys. What is that? Oh, this is the first page of the script. So ultimately, of course, we needed like the script written out so that our designers could input it into the main book. But we did that with pretty much a fairly preliminary script and then line edited within the art to get it to where it is now. Right.
Yeah, we can kind of click through the slides. I don't know that they all super matter.
Sorry, I'm getting real close, guys. Yeah, you know, at one point we were working on that outline that we were talking about earlier, and I think Lily and I, Lily's more of a visual person, and so am I. As an editor, I work on a lot of picture books, and I sort of think in pictures and like whole pieces rather than like separating the text and the art. So at one point, it just got to the place where I felt like we just needed to see it so that we could start moving things around.
Yeah, if you go to the next slide, I think there was we got it wrong a lot. So like this is a whole scene where there's supposed to be like a montage of them being friends. And I did it where there's like different panels, but then it just looked like they all needed to be talking to each other. And the way Karen and I worked was like, I would show Karen the art, and then she and I would talk about it a little bit before Emily. Sorry, Emily. But that was just kind of how like we worked on our end, just because a lot of that writing needs to come out visually. And when we were working on the Mean Magenta, that's what we would do. Like we would write it together. I would illustrate it, and then I'd send a sketch to Karen, and Karen would edit the sketch, and then I would make the edits, and then that would be how we worked. So it was like doing that and then sending it to Emily, and we did that. And I remember Karen being like, I don't think this reads. And then we tried to figure out a different way to do it, and we ended up using the Polaroid thing a few times through, because it just seemed like something Abby would have. Like Abby would totally have a Polaroid camera, and she'd be taking snapshots of her friends.
And can I say, I really love, there are certain moments in this book, I actually flagged it, I have the book right here so I can show you, that, you know, we spent a lot of time when we were developing this and in the earlier stages talking about how do teenage girls act around each other. It's been a while since I was a teenage girl. But I remembered a few things. So like the Abby Polaroid thing felt really real, because even if it feels like a little like, oh, everybody does that, like, of course Abby would. And like, teenage girls especially, you know, pictures are so important and in sort of capturing moments. And one of my favorite things that we talked about, which I have right here, is I don't know if you guys can see that, but when they all go to the bathroom together, which we had a discussion about that, because I think at first maybe it was like she had to go to the bathroom or whatever. We talked and I was like, no, when I was a 16-year-old and you're with your friends at a football game or whatever, it's like you just go together. Like even if it's a one stall thing, you don't want to stop talking. And I felt like lots of these little moments come up in this book that make it feel really real, or at least really close to like my experience as a teenager. So I thought that was a really nice way that you guys sort of pushed the character development and the friendship story forward.
Thank you.
Next slide. Oh, there's
a final. Yeah. That's what it ended up looking like.
And I thought that those sort of interludes of the photographs were good too, because they gave us a little bit of a break, because again, it is a 336-page graphic novel for middle grade students. And so having, you know, we have sort of chapter breaks so that if it's sort of natural places where you can stop if you need to, if you're more of a reluctant reader or just don't have the time. And these montages, I think, also helped.
One of my favorite things on this page, and I don't know if anyone ever catches it, is something Karen wrote, which is, if you look closely, there's Abby drawing a still life, and then Christine's eating the still life. And I don't feel like many people catch that, but Karen wrote that, and I love it so much.
One of the things about Christine that you'll find through the book is that she's like always snacking. Like she's an athlete, and so she's just like constantly eating. And the other girls are kind of like, how do you do that?
Next slide, please.
Oh yeah, these are. I told myself I would take documentation photos through the process of working on it, and this is like all I got. So.
It was a lot. I know I was looking through, I think a little bit later, or maybe in the next, you'll see a couple of images of my notes. Yeah. So sort of towards the end, my editorial process was to just print out the whole book and write on the margins of it notes to them, because that seemed like the easiest, most direct, and then scan it and send it to them. So I can't actually see what that says, but oh, you know, that was supposed to be the opening spread originally, and you can see the copyright page on the left side. But I thought, and I think Lily and Karen agreed, that it might be confusing to start with a small image of Sasha, because the book is really about the four of them, and I didn't want people to think it was her story with other people's friends. It's, you know, it kind of felt like it was putting her front and center. I wouldn't want any of the girls there. So we changed it to sort of opening, welcome back students, the opening, so we know exactly where we are in time and space. And then we jump into meeting our girls.
Oh, piggybacking off of that comment is, I thought it was really interesting that we had four main characters, which that was really a struggle when we were writing the script. I remember making sure that each of them had enough screen time in the book and didn't have too much or didn't dominate the story. It is a lot. It is very Abby heavy, just because she's that activist and she's got, you know, that
drives the whole plot forward. But
yeah, but I think it ended up working really well, and I think a lot of that is because of your notes, Emily, to be like, we need more of this here, we need more of this friendship between these two here, you know, like that really helps. I think Lily and I, because we just kind of assumed like, oh yeah, they're all friends and they've been friends forever, but in this book they haven't, right? So I think that helped a lot, having someone else who wasn't as familiar with our four girls.
Mm-hmm.
It always helps to have, we only have about 10 minutes left, and I definitely want to get to one or two questions from the viewers. But yeah, I would say having extra eyes for anyone who is a writer, creator, or aspiring to be one, having extra eyes always helps. So I actually took, I think when it was about in this stage, took it to my editorial meeting, which is a meeting I have weekly with all of the other editors at, I work at Roaring Brook, but which is an imprint of Macmillan, but is a sister imprint of First Second, where we published this book. And it was really helpful to see what they caught and like where they felt character development was needed, because at that point I felt too close to it, because when you work on a book so much, I'm pretty sure I could just like recite this book to you guys right now. Do we want to skip to questions, or do we want to see what else is on these slides?
I think the slides are almost done. If you want to just click through them to see if there's anything. Nah, just reworking it. Oh, and then we inked it in Photoshop, and then I had to have surgery in the middle of our deadline, so Karen helped me color it, and then a friend named Kaylee helped color it. So 3 of us actually colored the book. And then that's what it looks like finished. And then Kaylee colored this red.
My favorite product.
And then I think that's it.
Okay, so let me open up this document and we'll see what we haven't answered yet. So, okay, Justin Bray asks, do you build a world first before filling it with characters, or do you build your world around characters that have been mulling around in your brain forever?
How do we do that?
Well, I think we definitely built our characters first and foremost, right? And then I remember when we started the book, we had to have a huge discussion, Lily, about where do we want it to take place? Do we want it in an actual city that exists, or do we want it in a, I think we ended up with Hazleton. We made up a name, but it's a Bay Area-esque city because that's where we both grew up. And then I think you can tell from the way the school is designed, right, that it's Bay Area because it's like open air. It's not like this, New York all-enclosed building on multiple levels. It's like, oh yeah, just walk to that wing through the park.
Yeah, and if anyone is familiar with like Walnut Creek, California, Hazleton is like a play on that, because it's a different nut. There you go.
Okay, so let's see. Galen asks, if you script, which we did, how do you know when the script is finished and ready for moving into the visual side of stuff?
You don't. You just do it.
I think as we talked about a little bit earlier, it was kind of a natural, like one thing kind of moved into the other until it came to a point where all 3 of us were like, we just need to see it. Like, it's just, but at that point we did have sort of beginning, middle, end figured out. And all of those beats were pretty much figured out. And we had, I think, probably figured out certain scenes within it. But then even as Lily went to final art on it, I think she would notice things as usually happens and kind of tweak stuff even at that stage. So it's all, and then by even the last pass that we did, we were still tweaking some of the dialogue. So it all just kind of runs into each other, which from my experience is pretty much the same on any kind of book that has a visual component and a written component, picture books or chapter books, etc.
And we definitely, I know when Lily was, even when she was thumbnailing, she was like texting me and she'd be like, this is so much more work than I thought it was going to be. Like, this needs more panels. And then we'd get to a point where she'd text me and she'd be like, we need to rewrite this scene because it's not working, So I think you get it to as good a point as you can where you feel like it's really solid. And then once you start drawing, Lily can speak to that more, but once you start drawing, I think it's going to change.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to be on Karen's side of it because like I'm processing it as I'm trying to draw it. And like there were gaps. So like you thought you had it so tight and then you get to drawing it and you're like, oh my God, this doesn't flow. So then I would be texting Karen and I remember I would text you panels and you're like doing a real job, like not not what I'm doing. And you're like, I would text you and I'd be like, I'm gonna put this here and this here and this here. Tonight I'll send you this in an email. I hope this is okay. And then I'd like later that night at like 10 p.m. I'd get an email back that was like, yep, but change these things. And then I'd go in the next day and I'd change them. So like there were gaps we filled, and I feel like that would be kind of funny to be on your side of it where I'm like doing something and then having to tell you that what we had written didn't work, which I can't imagine.
Yeah, I will say that most of the time I would be like, oh, a text from Lily, what's this? Because I'd be like, I need a break from all my power flow studies or whatever, you know? And then, but then the other times when you were sending me whole panels and I had to actually like really see it, I was like, I can't do this on my phone. Like, you know?
And then I thought, sort of as we wrap up in the next few minutes, we could just talk about some fun stuff about the book. So what was your favorite part of either creating the book, or what is your favorite scene in the book?
My favorite scene is the one that I didn't write, but I had the luxury of illustrating, which is the one that Karen wrote the jokes in, where Christine says, "You big old fart bag," because it was so funny, and the way we had the like Karen had written the dialogue there, and the way we she led up to it was just so comical in my head. So it was like really fun to be able to just get to illustrate that and try to make it funny in the art. Yeah. I love that scene so much.
I love that scene too. And one of my favorite things about it is as Christine is sort of yelling at the guy and calling him a fart bag, which is a perfect insult. You just see Sasha in the corner going, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's just this perfect, and sort of toward the end, it's a nice light moment at the end of a book where you've sort of absorbed a lot, I think. I thought that was really great. What about you, Karen?
I think, well, I have several that I really like, but one of my other favorites is the scene where at the swim meet where Christine and this guy Ted, who's kind of into her, have an interaction where he's just like, he gives her a hug and she's going in for a high five and she's like, oh, and then he goes, let's study together for the math test. And she was like, but I have 104% in trig. Why do I need to study with you? And he's just like, see ya, you know, like she doesn't see that like, oh, he's trying to hang out with you. Yeah. And she's like, but I'm really good at that. Like,
yeah. I know Karen and I actually wrote out the art for that one together. And when I executed it, that one was almost probably one of the easiest scenes to draw, because we had written the art because we had a Skype call and we talked through that scene, and it was so funny the way we envisioned her, like going for a high five, getting hugged, and then the scene just ends and her hand's still up. And we were like, that's just so funny.
Yeah.
Oh God, that is one I'm really satisfied with the art.
Spoiler alert, he's the one who ends up being a fart bag. So.
Yeah.
It comes full circle.
Well, awesome. I think we are pretty much out of time, but thank you everyone for tuning in, and Lily and Karen, of course, for this conversation.